Um, okay. Hello, 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 hello. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. I want to welcome you to the May edition of ZER Consulting Africa Skill Masterclass. My name is Patricia Ifewulu, and I will be your host for today's session. Okay, so let's get into it. Our agenda is on the screen. And our agenda today will follow the usual pattern. I will introduce the ZER framework in case you have not come across it before. Then we will have a live question and answer session with our guest, Dr. Rufaro Yankatawa Muchika, and then we will discuss the next steps. So, why this masterclass? So, ZER Consulting Africa is a purpose driven consulting firm, and our value proposition is that we work to empower African businesses and leaders to turn their vision into sustainable growth. And we do this by sharing knowledge, tools, frameworks that African entrepreneurs can use to upskill themselves so that they can build scale and scalable and resilient businesses. So why me? Why am I facilitating? I am a senior advisor with ZER Africa, but I'm also a governance, risk, and compliance professional and a lawyer by training. I have over 20 years of experience working in the financial services sector. I have worked in Pan African multinational organizations where I was responsible for the strategic direction and operational leadership of the legal compliance and corporate governance functions. I've led a multi jurisdictional team and I've designed and I've also implemented the governance framework, compliance programs, and compliance risk management frameworks across multiple jurisdictions in Africa. I've also worked with boards in different African countries to support effective governance, informed decision making, and sound risk oversight. So I bring a Pan African perspective from all these experiences. And of course, I'm also an off-road optimist. Okay, so let me briefly introduce the ZER Africa Skill Framework. It is a five-step roadmap that is designed to help African businesses move from vision to structure, from structure to performance, and from performance to sustainable growth. So the framework is built on a simple but powerful idea. Business growth does not happen by ambition alone. It requires clarity of direction. It requires disciplined execution. It requires a strong leadership, sound governance, and of course, access to the right kind of capital. So the SCALE acronym stands for, the first letter is S, and S stands for strategize your vision. Vision is where growth begins. Every business must be clear about where it is going, why it exists, who it serves, and what success looks like. And here at ZER, we believe that strategy is what helps businesses to move from what I call scattered activity to deliberate direction. C stands for champion excellence. Excellence is not a one off act, it is a habit. And in business, it is nothing more than a set of standard operating procedures. So by championing excellence, your business will transition from founder dependency to what we call system dependency so that you can go ahead and build a culture where quality is consistent regardless of who is in the driving seat. A stands for accelerate exceptional leadership. Now, we all know that vision is only as strong as the people executing it. And this pillar focuses on talent development and succession planning. It's all about identifying and empowering the next layer of leadership so that the organization or the business has the bench strength to survive and thrive beyond the current leadership. The next is L, and L stands for leverage governance for sustainable growth. This pillar is very personal to me because I'm a governance professional, and I know from experience that a lot of founders see governance as a boring checkbox exercise. In the SCALE framework, we view governance as a competitive advantage because robot governance is what provides the business with the guardrails that prevent what we call the founder's trap and ensures that the business will remain ethical, transparent, and resilient in the face of market volatility. Now, the last but not the least is E, which is expand your impact through growth capital. You see, as a business, once the foundation is solid, you are ready to scale. That is why this stage focuses on investor readiness. When your strategy, your excellence, your leadership, and your governance are in place, you don't go asking for capital. Your business will attract that capital. And that growth capital is then becomes the fuel that expands your impact across the continent. And what makes the scale framework powerful is that these pillars are not isolated, they are related and they reinforce one another. So today's masterclass, we are going to focus on E in the scale, which is expand your impact through growth capital. And to help us unpack this is going to be our guest, Dr. Rufaro, who will share insights on how expanding impact through growth capital is not just about raising funds, but it's about mindset, it's about strategy and positioning that makes your business attractive to the right capital partners at the right time. So I can see that Dr. Rufaro is already in the room. Doctor, thank
Yes,
you very much for being here. It's a privilege to have you join this master class and to help us unpack this topic. If you would permit me, I'm going to give our audience a very brief exposition on your profile. You bring a distinguished career at the intersection of strategy, finance, governance, and business development. You have more than 25 years experience in financial services sector across Africa and other international markets, and you have a deep expertise in African market development. You currently serve as the director for Africa at JZ Finance. You are the founder and the CEO of RDK Capital, chairperson of the board of directors at Creston Zimbabwe and Masthead South Africa, and you also sit on the board of Inclusivity Solution and IT company. You are the author of Doing Business in Africa, and you hold an impressive combination of academic and professional credentials, including a PhD in business strategy in emerging markets and an MBA. Wow. Well, I guess everybody must agree with me that the breadth of your experience makes you exceptionally well placed to help us unpack today's topic. So, thank you very much once more for joining us.
thank you, Patricia.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So, we're going to dive into it, and I want to use this opportunity to tell our audience that please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and the doctor will address them at the end of the session. So, Doctor, let's start. So, I looked at your profile. So, from a mathematics and physics teacher to a global financial leader with over 20 years experience in the financial services sector, and experience that span both local and international market, you've had an illustrious career, that is certain. So, please, can you share with us a bit more information about your career journey? And if you can also put more context on what you do currently as the director for Africa JC Finance, which is an IFC, because I believe it's very pivotal to the topic we'll be discussing today.
Wow, what a question. To be honest, I would just try to kind of maybe come up with some highlights because otherwise you'll take the whole day. At my age, you can imagine the life that I've experienced. But in summary, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me this platform and being able to share my experiences, my journey, my views, and maybe just to give an idea of why I am where I am today. So, yeah, born in Zimbabwe, and I've been in South Africa since since I started my professional career as a statistician, like you've rightly said, okay, teacher, statistician. Yeah, and then 25 years ago, I've been in the financial services industry, and yes, I spent lots of time in South Africa, but I also spent, a couple of years in other African countries, and now I'm operating at a global level. So maybe just briefly, I think for me, if I just look at some of the defining moments, because I think some of my work is going to come out, I think, from maybe, the discussion that you and I are actually going to talk about. My defining moments really came from, I come from a rural background. That's where I grew up, where I didn't have shoes, whatever but the one thing for me that was very critical was where I learned about Ubuntu. I am because you are, right? So it was about caring about other people. When, let's say, my mom is going to a funeral somewhere, that your auntie will take care of you. So there's a lot of taking care of other people and caring for others. So I think my rural background really taught me so much around that. Then when I was seconded to West Africa, by the way, I stayed in Nigeria for about 2 years. Ghana, I think it was about a year. Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal. When I was used to work for Nedbank, I was seconded to really help build a wealth management business in those geographies. One thing that I learned in those areas was, you know, the um, the entrepreneurship spirit. And to be honest, when I came back, one of the things that I said to myself is, I learned that you have got a couple of muscles, you've got different talents. You can't just focus on a profession because that's what you went to study and therefore you need to do that. I really learned to say I've got so many different muscles, and how do I, harness the different muscles that I have in my body to create different businesses and do different things, because I'm more than just an individual. And I think if I look at where I am now, especially with working for Jersey Finance as the director for Africa, I think for me, I feel as an African child who grew up in rural areas, we have spent time in different African, countries. I managed to gain that credibility to be able to take Africa to the world. So I see myself as someone who has been very much strong in the wealth management space, changing people's lives, being able to connect capital to African opportunities, as well as, helping African wealth go global. I think that's really the intersection that I find myself in.
Wow, I hear you. Africa is known for their community spirit. So for you, entrepreneurship is linked to that. People becoming entrepreneurial, coming up with innovations, with solutions that would help lift the community living. Thank you so much. I think every one of us has that same story where you came from the village, and the story of the village boy who conquered the world is a familiar theme. If you listen to the story of a lot of African successful entrepreneurs. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. But just to go back to your experience, having worked in a lot of these institutions, and you've talked about how it shaped how you look at capital. But I just want to ask this follow-up question. So, if you can give us some practical insight, at what point did impact become the deliberate focus and not growth? Because sometimes it's as if these two cannot run simultaneously, but they can.
Yeah. I think, like I said, when I found myself at the intersection of spending time in other African countries, especially when I was doing my PhD, it was on internationalization of businesses anyway, really looking at businesses that expand beyond the national borders. And also as an African child with African perspectives. And like I mentioned earlier, especially with the international finance, I see myself as a bridge between the continent and the global world. Impact became very deliberate when I realized that I have a lot of knowledge to help people change how they view at times their money, their businesses, and how they need to live their lives. Because I actually saw it, especially in my space, when my father, because I think he was taught in the linear thinking space where You go to school, after school, you look for a job. At the end of your career, you go on retirement. He went back to the rural areas. He did not last long because I think for him, he did not know how else to maximize on the different talents that he had because that's not what he was used to. So I think my experiences, and especially like I said, spending time in West Africa, it really taught me to say you are not a linear person. You are different. And with that knowledge that I now managed to gain from my experiences, I realized that I can change people and how they think about money, right? So for me, impact became deliberate, especially when I realized that growth without intention can actually destroy value. Because if you look at my studies in my PhD, I was studying South African companies that have expanded outside South Africa. Some succeeded and some failed, right? And and again, hence I am talking about growth without intention can actually destroy value. It's something that I picked up, do, especially during my studies. So what I also learned was that businesses can scale revenues. They can expand into multiple markets and even raise significant capital whilst quietly weakening its culture because now you're expanding into markets that you don't even understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are trying to apply what you know at home, but you do not understand how things work from a regulatory landscape. You are now eroding trust. It can be, from your investors. Yeah, really drifting away from the original problem it set out to actually solve. So impact stopped being a separate conversation. For me, it became the test of whether growth is meaningful and sustainable.
Okay, yeah, thank you. You know what you said just reminded me of the slogan of a Pan African multinational company, and their motto is "We are Pan African commitment made local."
Yes.
Okay, let's circle back. There's something you said about maximizing talent, and I want to bring this conversation back to growth because that is what our topic is all about. So when we talk about growth capital, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, and for some people capital is all about finance, but for others is broader than that. So I want you to give us your perspective here as someone who has sat on both. I think you've sat on both sides of the extreme as an investor and maybe also as someone who understands the entrepreneurial mindset. So what do you think founders and boards and executives should understand when they hear that term growth capital? What does it actually mean? And does it actually mean anything beyond finance itself?
Yeah, I think, you rightly said about also me being, sitting in boards as well. And I think one thing that I've learned sitting in boards is that people tend to look at capital just as finance, right? But when you look at capital, capital comes in so many different forms. There's intellectual capital, there's human capital, we've got social capital, we've got natural capital, we've got manufactured capital. So capital comes in so many different forms. Whilst in Africa, I think there's a tendency of capital is just the financial side of capital. But anyway, so for me, growth capital in Africa must be understood far more broadly than just simply funding, which is what organizations or business people tend to look at. Because from where I sit, growth capital is an ecosystem, like I've just mentioned now, the different types of capital. So growth capital is not simply someone writing a check. That's not what it is. It is really about capital capability and credibility. Um, you know, the funding matters because you need money, but what investors are really asking is, can this business absorb capital effectively? Can leadership execute? Because you can have money, but if you don't know how to execute, it's just not going to happen. Are governance structures credible? Can this scale responsibly? And the word responsibly is a verb or a term that is becoming more and more important because we need to learn about corporate citizenship. It's not just about money. It's really about, am I growing? How about my community where my business is located? How about the environment where my business is located? So one misconception is that organizations, um, um, uh, you know, um, that organizations tend to make is that capital is just the financial capital. And I think I've mentioned the other forms of capital as well. So in summary, we need to remember that capital is not just financial. Capital comes in so many different forms because if you have a business, even if you get money, but you do not have people that understand the institutional space that we are operating, and you come up with a strategy that is not going to suit the environment that you are in, that capital is going to be destroyed. So one really need to understand that capital is not just the financial. It comes in so many different forms. Do you have the right people? I also see like at times international companies, they tend to say, you know what, this is how we do things in my country. Therefore, we are going to send one of us managers from this developed country A to come and manage this business in Africa because we want to continue doing what we do at home. But if this seconded person does not understand the culture, to be honest, they are wasting their money because you need local leadership for you to be able to. You need someone who knows how to operate within the environment. That becomes quite important. You need someone who understands the regulatory landscape because remember, a lot of these regulatory landscapes are not necessarily put up there where everybody can see. So you need someone who really understands the cultural nuances. In fact, I know I'll go on and on. I become very passionate about these topics.
No, so it's okay. Your last comment about understanding the culture, that is something that I can relate to. Having worked in an organization that has subsidiaries across three regions in Africa, and I was responsible for driving governance and compliance. And it was always a nightmare because each jurisdiction has its own peculiarities, its own nuances, and at the same time, you are trying to embed the same standard across. And usually, of course, you come to a place, a situation where you recognize that you must make allowance for local nuances so that you can bring them in, because without it you discover that your processes of the business would stall. But I want to take you back to what you said about there being different kinds of capital, and that capital does not necessarily or is not limited or restricted to just writing a check. You've talked about, of course, intellectual capital, and then there's the human capital as well. From your perspective, which one do you think is more critical, or should there be a balance? And if we're to balance it, from your perspective, what would be the best ratio as when you're talking about the finance, the human capital, the intellectual capital, and others? What would be the best balance between these different kinds of capitals that would help the business to scale?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of business, the environment that it is in. And for me, what I tend to even suggest is at times think about maybe having an advisory committee, people that understand the market that we are operating in, but also experts that are diverse, because you should not bring all accountants into advisory committee. You might need even a psychologist, sitting on the table, an environmentalist, an accountant, maybe a lawyer, maybe an IT specialist, because you need different expertise to be able to bring lens, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you don't know what you don't know, at that point it means you might be weakened in terms of it might be the intellectual capital because of whoever is sitting around the table, right? When it comes to human capital, again, it depends on the nature of your business. Does it require many staff members, or it can be, a business that can be run by one or two people? So the different capitals, they really depend on the nature of business, the environment that you are in, and so many aspects. So, but at the end of the day, that analysis one needs to look at for them to know which area they might need to actually enhance.
Okay, thank you. So, what I hear you saying is that for the business owners and the entrepreneur, the founder, they must understand their business. They must have their strategy at the back of their hands, because that is what that analysis, that is what will help them make that right decision. What kind of capital, in what ratio should we have this capital? Thank you, Dr. Rufaro. I want to take you back to the comment you made about sometimes foreign businesses that wants to set up offices in Africa, and they bring in a foreigner to come in and run the business, and a foreigner who most often than not does not understand the cultural niceties of a particular jurisdiction, and sometimes the not too positive impact that would have on the business. That's a practical insight regarding what I will call some of the misconceptions that foreign investors have about investing in Africa. Given what you do at GC Finance currently, where, like you said, you connect investors with growth opportunities in Africa, what other common misconceptions can you identify that sometimes the international investors have about bringing in, growth capital in Africa?
Yeah. Before I actually go there, I think I just want just to emphasize a few points about what is most misunderstood about growth capital. Because many founders actually think, if I raise capital, my problems are solved. That's what they think. In reality, capital amplifies what already exists. So if governance is weak, which means capital accelerate chaos. If systems are strong, it means capital accelerates scale. Another misconception is that governance can be dealt with later. That is often where businesses get into trouble. So I just wanted just to highlight that point as well. Then going back to your question about the misconceptions from international investors, there's a tendency. I'm not so sure how you should have traveled on other continents as well, where people do not. There are people that do not know that Africa has got 54 countries. There's a tendency of thinking that Africa is just one country, right? And mine, especially for me, who's based in South Africa, and you say you're in South Africa, they think you're on the southern part of that country called Africa. They won't even understand that actually South Africa is a country on its own because of all those misconceptions. So the misconceptions of thinking that Africa is one country, that's where the main problem starts, because there's a perception of, oh, okay, if something works in Nigeria, so which means I can easily do that, let's say in Congo, I can easily do that, let's say in Lesotho. They forget that each country has got its own regulation, at times its own language. And if you look at in Africa, for example, we've got many business languages as well. You've got English, you've got French, you've got Arabic. If you go in the East, just as much as English is there, there's also Swahili. We also have a lot of our local languages and a lot of our own cultures as well, which at times, international investors tend to forget. So they see Africa as one investment story. They assume governance risk is
The same.
uniform. Informal means unsophisticated, not understanding that, Africa is a sandbox for creativity, actually, for innovation. And the reality is far more nuanced, which many of them, they do not necessarily understand. You and I know that Africa is highly sophisticated in terms of entrepreneurs that we have. And we are very adaptive as well, because, we are always on our toes, just making sure that you beat the next person and really stay ahead of the pack. So yeah, so the issue is context, not necessarily capability, which at times they tend to miss.
Okay, thank you so much. There's something you said. I'm going to come back to you on that later in the session, which is the belief or this attitude by a lot of business entrepreneurs or business founders that governance is something that we're going to get back to that later. Is an afterthought. So when we let's start running the business first, then we'll come back to governance. And I want to tie it into what you also said about and this struck me, and I think it's maybe one of for me it's going to be one of the key takeaways from this session. You said that capital amplifies what is already there. So if chaos is what is already there, the capital will amplify the chaos. If it is disorganization, it will amplify that disorganization. And I think this is a very key message that founders need to take with them. So it's not about somebody writing you that check. Once you get the money, the finance is going to expose what already exists, and so that is not what is going to determine the success, but it will show you what already exists. Thank you so much. I'm going to take that with me. Okay, so I want us to move along. And let me go back again also and refer to your role as the director for Africa, JC Finance. So, and you connecting investors with business opportunities in Africa, and the fact that, yes, it means you're sitting at the table, so you understand the investor's mindset. I'm going to keep on harping on this. So, and now you sitting from that mindset of an investor, what are the non negotiable elements of a business that is investor ready? Or to rephrase it, what do serious investors really look for before committing fund? And I think business founders and entrepreneurs need to know this because some are of the view that it starts and stops with the wonderful pitch deck.
Yeah, so I might not necessarily sit on the table, but I sit in the rooms where, we have got service providers, that are supporting those that want to do offshore structuring, private equity, venture capital. So I am in those circles because those are, that's the ecosystem that I generally operate in. So you find that most of this ecosystem is supporting entrepreneurs. Uh, and in addition, I also sit on boards where shareholders are looking for return on investment, right? Because I put my money and, they also want, in terms of what am I going to get out. So in some cases, making decisions whether to continue funding certain investments or not. So those are kind of the circles that I tend to sit on. But again, going back to your question around the non-negotiable elements. So from an investor perspective, readiness is about trust because can I trust you with my money? In my work, because I engage with like private equity managers, some VC managers, at times some family offices, and other, allocators, I see that while their mandates differ, because it depends on, what they're focusing on, but their core concerns are surprisingly consistent. So serious investors, I'm just going to list about five. Serious investors look for number one, leadership maturity. Can leadership execute beyond vision? Because you can have a very beautiful vision on a nicely decorated piece of paper, but can leadership execute beyond vision? Governance credibility. Are there mechanisms for oversight and challenge? Financial discipline, which is number three. Do the numbers tell a coherent story? You and I were chatting about someone who comes asking for $5 billion because they've got this vision, but investors are going to kind of really try to, is it making sense? Strategic realism. Does the team understand? I've told you about my experience looking at companies that go beyond borders. Scalability. Can the business absorb growth without operational collapse? Because at times we love to expand, but the point is, can the business sustain that expansion? Is it calculated? Are you ready for it? So yeah,
Well, that's a very long list, Doctor, but I think you've been able to hit all the important aspect of what investors really look at before committing funds. And I'm glad um, we are cycling back to, apart from trust, we're also cycling back to governance. And sometimes also when I look at it, I think governance is part of what is going to bring about that trust. Because before an investor commit their funds, an investor would expect to have some form of what I call reasonable assurance that that capital will be protected. So, and governance is one of the what I'll call the pillars, or what can help give investors that assurance. Thank you very much for that. I Before we move on from this, I have what I'll call a follow-up question. So, from the list that you've given us, basically, and from your experience, this businesses that are able to have these things in place, that is what distinguishes them from ability to, that's what distinguishes them from being able to attract capital from those that are not able to attract capital. But you see, you've just talked about these things and it's so easy. And my question is, why is it that founders sometimes find this hard to do?
so if I look at, from my experience and what I've seen, like I said, I also sit on board. Businesses that attract capital tend to demonstrate disciplined leadership, financial visibility, governance maturity, operational clarity, and realistic growth pathways, because that gives assurance to whoever wants to give you financial capital, right? And those that struggle, often they have the founder dependency, which you mentioned earlier as well, poor controls, blade personal and business finances. I know some people that have got a business and they use the business income to do their personal stuff. You cannot do that. Weak governances, overconfidence, unsupported by systems, because you've got this beautiful idea. A pitch deck may attract attention, but the governance converts that attention into investment.
Okay, Doctor, let me just play the devil's advocate here. Like you said, we have a lot of talent in Africa, and we have these young, bright young people, very bright, very intelligent, that have all these wonderful ideas, coming up with innovations. So sometimes, yes, that makes them technical experts in their field. But some of the things that a business needs to attract capital actually falls within the realm of leadership and organizational leadership and organizational management, because you've talked about financial credibility. How do you must have financial governance, you must have your books, your balance sheet, even if it's simple bookkeeping, separate your finances, then have governance structures in place, even if they're simplified versions. There must be systems of internal control. Um, Document your decision making so that investors can see that you don't make decision based on guts, and you can continue to name them. These are all things that fall within the realm of like I said, organizational management, governance. And the truth is, at that point where the founder is pitching, they have these lovely ideas, they have a problem they want to solve, they've seen that there is a target market for it. I really don't think they have that experience, sometimes the awareness that something is missing. So my question when I'm going towards this is, okay, so what can the investors do to help? An idea may be good, an idea may be maybe something that has potential, but there are other things. The foundation has to be built because the problem is in execution. That's the gap between objective or goal and vision, execution in the middle. So, what can investors do? And I think this falls within the realm of our discussion when we're talking about growth capital. It's not only finance. What can investors do to uh, help these in what I'll call founders to deal with that thing that is in the middle? Is the way that can happen?
Yeah, so I think for me, it a lot really starts with, especially the founders themselves. You know, knowing which platform they can go for them to be seen, because an investor is not going to see you if you are not in the right places. So personally, I think that, I've seen some founders that, at times they join some of the accelerators. They find platforms where they can be seen, they reach out. But I think for me, if there is a lot of focus on impact, because if you look at in today's world, there's really a lot of focus on, how do you make impact? How can you contribute towards, sorry, whatever business that we are putting together, need to live it better than, especially in the environment where you are. You need to live that community better than what you saw in that community. So I think for me, it's really the founders themselves making sure that they are seen, because even if investors have got money, if they don't know that you exist, nobody's going to come and look for you.
Okay. Let's go back to impact. I think you mentioned that maybe like three times in your last statement. So, business leaders or founders are being asked to run their business in a way that is which is beneficial to the community where they operate from. But this is a question I want to ask for you. Honestly speaking, do investors really care about impact? Or because investors' primary goal in investing is to get a return on their investment.
Yeah.
That is the primary aim of every investor. So, do they really care about that impact, or is it something that is secondary to uh, them?
Yeah, so if you look at 20 years ago, impact wasn't important. I wouldn't think, maybe it was, but it wasn't as important as it is, especially in today's world. Because if you really look at today's world, and you and I, we sit on the boards, we have realized that ethical leadership is being pushed more and more. And really impact comes from focusing not just capital, but organizational ethics. And I see this in my world where I am. Being a responsible corporate citizen, sustainable development, and stakeholder inclusivity is becoming some of those areas that are quite important. And also really looking at, you operate in a certain environment, economy, society and environment, you need to care about those. Stakeholder inclusivity has started to become a very topical area. Think about your stakeholders, your employees, customers, suppliers, communities, government, because the more you take your stakeholders into decision making, the more you can actually create value into the future. So going back to your question around, is impact something that investors truly value? Increasingly, yes, like I've said, particularly among impact-oriented capital, responsible investors, long-term allocators. Even, I think we normally hear a lot about the next gen as well, but investors want disciplined impact. They ask, is it measurable? Is it sustainable? Is governance strong enough to preserve it? Because, you just don't want to be a one night, whatever, winner. Impact without structure is narrative, but impact with governance becomes investable.
Okay. So let me play the devil's advocate once more. From what you're saying, investors do care about impact, but that impact has to translate to the bottom line.
Yes.
And that's the so it's not impact for its sake. It's not about corporate social responsibility activities that do not impact the bottom line. Because well, know why I'm saying this. In my former life, where I led a company to develop its ESG strategy, I remember the mandate that the managing director gave us, that whatever we're doing must have an impact on the bottom line. So what he expected was initiatives and ESG goals that would have a positive impact on the company's bottom line at the end of the day. And I think that's the key message, a key message for investors to take, for business founders to take from this session, that impact is good, but it has to be impact, not for the sake of it, because sometimes the temptation is there to do some grand gestures that at the end of the day might not be meaningful to the business growth. Thank you very much for that. Now, I want to go back to your statement on the fact that capital amplifies what is already there, what exists. I love that, and that sometimes, many times, founders take governance as something that is an after thought. You're the chair of, I think, one or two boards, and you also have a non-executive director role on other boards as well. And governance is a major part of your core expertise. So I'll say that you are currently sitting in the engine room of capital of a lot of companies. So, from your own experience, please give us some insight. What role do you think a board can play in helping businesses become attractive to capital? And as an addendum to that, please help us unpack this issue. Founders see governance as a roadblock. How can it become a growth enabler rather than a constraint, especially for upcoming businesses?
Yeah. So I think if you just look at from board's perspective, boards are central to really capital readiness, because governance directly affects investor confidence, due diligence outcomes, structuring decisions, valuation perceptions. So if you look at, especially in the private equity or venture capital, and and a whole lot of other investors, they all care about governance. Different pools of capital move differently, but all serious capital asks the same question: can this business be trusted to scale responsibly?
So now, on governance, maybe as a governance professional, there is something that I have observed. You may, maybe if you have made the same observation, you can let me know. So when we talk about governance, most founders look at it and they stop at the board. Now, as a lawyer, and as a governance professional, I've always known that when you look at, it's about governance, is about decision making, is about role clarity, responsibilities, and accountability. And I've always understood the decision making triangle or tree of an organization. In Nigerian regulatory framework, you have the shareholders in general meeting, you have the board of directors, then the managing director or the CEO or the founder representing management. From the shareholders to the MD, it is usually, most often, the clarity is there.
Yeah.
Where the problem starts is from the managing director to executive management down to middle management. Most times, and I think probably that is where most founders have, or startups have, their problem. They don't seem to realize that that is also governance.
Yeah.
Where you start breaking down the role, the responsibilities, accountabilities from the managing director to middle management to the members of the team, because that is where the line usually blurs. And you have a situation where the MD is making all the decision. Every minor thing has to go through the managing director. And at that level, you discover that most organizations usually don't have what they call what do you call it? This DOA, delegation of authority, delegation of authority metrics. Could you please give me your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, I think there's also generally a perception that, governance is bureaucracy. But what we also know, if governance is done well, it really enables, like I said, faster, better decisions, accountability, risk visibility, investor confidence, long-term resilience. So governance is actually infrastructure. When we say we build roads, so in business, we need to remember that governance is actually that infrastructure for your business to actually grow. So, so to founders, they need to start earlier than they should think, to really start thinking about governances. You may not need a formal board immediately, but you absolutely need challenge, perspective, and accountability. What I also see is you can even start with an advisory board. An advisory board is really a team of diverse people that you know that they are experts in that area to be able to guide you. You come up, maybe even your risk report, you have maybe a bit of your financials, a bit, so you can really start small, but you have got other people that are testing the way you think and can really help you put the right guardrails on of your business. So in summary, for me, a valuable board challenges constructive. It brings relevant expertise. It supports leadership growth and protects long-term value. A ceremonial board, it's no value because you're just having people for the sake of having people. Make sure that you've got the right people in the room.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rufaro. I think we have a couple of one or two questions. If we can take one or two questions from the audience. Somebody wants to know how do we change the perception that most foreign investors think that Africa is one country instead of a continent of 54 countries. What do we do about that? How do we change that perception?
We need to, in whatever platform that we have, let's find a way of educating. And for me, I always believe that each one of us, whichever space that you are in, you can be able to make a difference. For myself, what I've decided to do, for those that are connected with me on LinkedIn, I write articles. Like, I think last year, I think towards the end of last year, I spoke about informal businesses in Africa. I wrote about capital alone is not enough, which is exactly more or less what we are talking about now. Let's find platforms where we can educate. I even wrote a book doing business in Africa. And I still think each one of us, if we work together and we find ways of really bringing these messages out, some of them get it. If I look at in my network, because I work with the global community, they've really come, a couple of them have really come to understand that they are different countries with different nuances.
Okay, Dr. Rufaro, thank you so much. We're running out of time, so but I have a final question for you, maybe just in a sentence. If you could give one piece of advice to founders that are looking to expand their impact through capital, what would it be? Just very brief.
I would say, like I said earlier, I think there is a statement that you remembered very well. Capital can accelerate growth, but governance determines whether growth survives. Africa does not lack entrepreneurs. What we need are more enduring institutions. And institutions are built through disciplined leadership, governance, intentional execution, and trusted capital partnerships.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rufaro. And on that note, we would end today's session. And I want to thank you so much for coming on board. It's been a very interesting 45 minutes. I myself have learned a lot from the engagement, and I hope that our audience, members of the audience, have a lot to take away with them. Thank you so much. I hope I will be able to see you some other time when you can come on and we'll continue this conversation. And all the best at your expanded role at JC Finance.
Thank you very much. And anybody who wants to connect with me, I am on LinkedIn, Rufaro Nyakatawa Mucheka. I would love to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, wow. I want to thank everyone, the audience. Thank you so much for being here and for participating. Um, you've had it all from Dr. Rufaro, who is the expert, and I'm sure you've gained a valuable perspective from her. But as we all know, insight is only useful when it is applied. And the real value of a session like this is not just in what you hear, but is also in what you do with the information afterwards. So, to help you take the next step, I'd like to invite you to complete the scale scorecard. On the screen, on your screen, you're going to see a QR code. Please take out your phone and scan the code. It will take you directly to the scorecard on ZER Consulting Africa website. The scorecard is a practical diagnostic tool. It helps you to, it's designed to help you to assess where your business is today, identify current strengths, and also highlight the gaps that may be holding your organization back. So I encourage you to use that scorecard to translate what we have discussed today into practical next steps for your own organization. And you can also access it by visiting ZER Consulting Africa website. I would also want to draw your attention to the book written by our managing director, CEO, called Afro Optimism Unleashed. The book is a number one bestseller on Amazon, and it is a very valuable resource for anyone who wishes to invest in a business in Africa, or is supporting a business in Africa, or is advising a business in Africa. You can find more information about the book on the screen, and I encourage you to get a copy and explore it. It is a very wonderful book. Please continue to stay connected with us. You can find ZER Consulting on LinkedIn. You can visit our website, or you can reach out to us via email. Today's session is not the end of this conversation regarding growth capital in Africa. It's part of our broader journey to help African businesses to become more structured, scalable, resilient, and investment ready. So I want to thank you all once again for taking the time to join us and for participating and for engaging. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you again in the future. Bye for now.